The lecture hall at the Galactic Academy buzzed with quiet conversation as students took their seats. Professor Velnara stood at the front of the class, her silver skin gleaming under the soft lights. She had 4 eyes that moved independently, watching different students settle into their places. Her long fingers tapped against the holographic control panel. "Silence, please," she said. Her voice was gentle but carried authority. The room fell quiet immediately. Students from 20 different species filled the classroom. There were the tall centauri with their blue crystalline skin. The small Quillen huddled together in groups, their fur changing colors with their emotions. Vaxian students sat rigid in their seats, always disciplined and formal. In the back corner sat Derek Walsh, the only human in the class. "Today we begin an important study," Professor Velnara announced. "We will learn about military history. Each species will present their most significant conflict. This helps us understand how war shaped your civilizations before joining the Galactic Federation." A Centauri student raised his hand. "Professor, most species only had 1 or 2 wars before space travel, correct?" "Yes, that is correct," Velnara replied. "Most species fought perhaps 1 global conflict, learned valuable lessons and then moved beyond warfare. Violence became unnecessary once they understood its true cost." She looked around the room. "Who wants to volunteer first?" Derek raised his hand in the back. Several alien students turned to look at him with curiosity. Humans were still new to the academy. Earth had joined the Federation only 3 years ago, and many students had never met a human before. Professor Velnara's eyes widened slightly. "Ah, student Derek Walsh. Please come forward." Derek stood and walked down the aisle. He was average height for a human with brown hair and calm brown eyes. He wore the standard academy uniform like everyone else. As he passed, a few Quillen students leaned away slightly, their fur turning light purple with nervousness. "Thank you, Professor," Derek said politely. He pulled out his data pad and connected it to the classroom display system. The holographic projector flickered to life above him. An image appeared. A blue and green planet rotated slowly in the air. White clouds swirled across its surface. 2 small moons orbited nearby. "This is Earth," Derek said. "My homeworld." The alien students leaned forward with interest. They had heard rumors about the strange beings from the Sol system, but few knew much about human history or culture. Derek swiped his finger across the data pad. The image changed. A timeline appeared, stretching across the entire display from one wall to the other. The timeline was marked with dates and small symbols. Red marks dotted the entire length from beginning to end. There were hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. A Quillen student gasped. Her fur turned bright yellow with shock. "That cannot be right. Your display scale must be wrong." "The scale is correct," Derek said calmly. "Each red mark represents a major conflict. Humans have been fighting wars for approximately 10,000 years of recorded history. These are only the major ones we have detailed records about." The classroom went completely silent. Students stared at the timeline with their mouths open or their sensory organs extended in disbelief. Professor Velnara moved closer to the display, all 4 of her eyes focusing on different parts of the timeline. "Impossible," a Centauri student muttered. "No species fights for 10,000 years and survives. The mathematics do not work. You would destroy yourselves." Derek zoomed in on one section of the timeline. The period expanded to fill the display. "This section represents what we call the 20th century. Just 100 years from our history. In this period alone, Earth experienced 2 global conflicts we call world wars." He tapped another command. Images began appearing around the timeline. Photographs and videos from human history. Soldiers in muddy trenches. Cities reduced to piles of rubble. Massive machines of war rolling across open fields. Ships burning in harbors. Aircraft falling from the sky. The alien students stared in growing horror. Many had never seen actual warfare. The Federation had been at peace for over 3,000 years. War was something they studied in history, not something they witnessed. "The First World War lasted 4 years, Derek continued. His voice remained steady and factual. "Approximately 20 million beings died. The Second World War lasted 6 years. Over 70 million beings died in that conflict." A Vaxian student stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. 70 million? From one planet? That is more than the entire current population of most Federation worlds. His face had turned dark red, showing extreme distress. "Yes," Derek said simply. "And those are just 2 wars from 1 century. We had hundreds of other conflicts during the same period. Smaller wars, revolutions, civil conflicts. Some lasted days. Others lasted decades. A female Quillen student near the front made a choking sound. Her fur cycled rapidly through colors: yellow, purple, orange, red. She was trying to process information that did not make sense to her peaceful species. "How?" she whispered. "How did your planet survive? Why did your species not destroy itself completely?" Derek opened his mouth to answer, but Professor Velnara raised her hand, stopping him. "Student Walsh, I must ask you to pause your presentation," she said. Her voice was shaking slightly. All four eyes were now focused on him with an intensity that made several students uncomfortable. "I need time to verify this information with the Federation Historical Archives. If what you are saying is accurate, this changes much of what we believed about human development and capabilities." Derek nodded and turned off the display. The images vanished, but their impact remained. He walked back to his seat while the room stayed silent. Professor Velnara stood at the front, clearly shaken. "Class is dismissed early today. I recommend you all use this time to begin researching human history on your own. We will continue tomorrow." Nobody moved at first. Then slowly students began gathering their things. But instead of leaving quickly as they usually did, they pulled out their personal data pads. Fingers, tentacles, and claws tapped rapidly on screens. Every student was searching for information about Earth's military history. Derek packed his materials slowly. He noticed the other students keeping their distance from him now. They whispered to each other while casting nervous glances in his direction. A group of Centauri students huddled together near the door, their conversation urgent and worried. The Quillen student who had gasped earlier approached Derek cautiously. Her fur was now pale green, showing uncertainty and fear. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "All of it? 10,000 years of war? 70 million dead in just one conflict?" Derek looked at her with kind eyes. "Yes, it is all true. Every word. Every number." He paused. "But tomorrow I will show you something else. I will show you how we went from that violent history to the peaceful species you see in the Federation today. There is more to the story." The Quillen student nodded slowly. Her fur shifted to light blue, showing thoughtfulness. She walked away without another word. Derek left the lecture hall last. Behind him he could still hear rising voices. Students were debating, arguing, trying to make sense of what they had learned. He heard words like dangerous and unstable, and why did the Federation accept them? He walked down the corridor alone. Tomorrow would be even more challenging. Tomorrow he would have to show them not just that humans fought wars, but how humans fought them. And that, he knew, would be even harder for them to understand. Derek arrived at the lecture hall 30 minutes early the next morning. He was not surprised to find it already crowded. Students from other classes filled every available space. They sat in the aisles, stood along the walls, and pressed against the doorway trying to see inside. Word had spread across the entire academy about the humans' presentation. Professor Velnara entered through the side door. She looked tired, like she had not slept. Dark circles showed under all four of her eyes. She carried a data pad clutched tightly in her long fingers. "I spent the entire night reviewing the human military archives," she announced to the packed room. Her voice was strained. "I contacted the Federation Historical Council. I verified every claim Student Walsh made yesterday." She paused and looked directly at Derek. Everything was accurate. Every number. Every date. Every conflict. She gestured toward him with a trembling hand. "Please continue your presentation." Derek walked to the front. The room was so quiet he could hear his own footsteps echoing. Hundreds of alien eyes watched his every movement. He connected his data pad to the display system. "Thank you all for coming," Derek said. "Yesterday I showed you how long humans have been fighting. Today I want to show you how we fought." He activated a video file. The holographic display filled with moving images. Soldiers wearing thick uniforms crouched in deep trenches carved into muddy ground. Rain poured down constantly. The men looked exhausted, covered in dirt and filth. Explosions erupted around them, throwing mud and debris into the air. The sound was deafening even through the recording. Machine gun fire crackled across open fields. Soldiers climbed out of the trenches and ran forward through the smoke. Many fell after just a few steps, cut down by bullets. More soldiers climbed out to replace them. The attack continued despite the losses. A student near the front made a choking sound. He was a young Taurillian, a species known for their advanced tactical thinking. "They fight on the ground? Standing in the open? That is suicide." "Yes," Derek said quietly. "Soldiers lived in those trenches for months, sometimes years. They fought for tiny pieces of land, advancing only a few meters at a time. Millions died in these conditions. He changed the video. This one showed cities from the air. Aircraft flew overhead, releasing bombs that fell like rain. Buildings exploded and collapsed. Fires spread through entire neighborhoods. People ran through the streets trying to escape the destruction. This represents something humans call total war, Derek explained. It was not just soldiers who fought. Entire nations devoted all their resources to victory. Factories produced weapons instead of normal goods. Farms grew food only for the military. Even civilians who did not fight were considered part of the war effort. A Quillan student swayed in her seat. Her fur turned white, which meant she was about to faint. The student next to her caught her before she fell to the floor. "Why?" asked a Vaxian from the middle rows. "Why involve those who do not fight? That violates every rule of civilized conflict." Derek's expression became somber. Because humans learned that destroying an enemy's ability to make war was as important as defeating their armies. We targeted factories that made weapons. We destroyed roads and bridges that moved supplies. We attacked cities where workers built military equipment. Several students stood and left the room. They could not watch anymore. Derek waited until they were gone, then continued. "But there is something worse I must show you," he said. He brought up a new image. A massive explosion filled the display. A mushroom-shaped cloud rose high into the sky, towering over everything. The cloud was so large it seemed impossible. Heat and light radiated outward, destroying everything for miles around. The alien students recoiled from the image, even though it was just a hologram. "This is an atomic weapon," Derek said. "One bomb. One explosion. It can destroy an entire city in seconds. Hundreds of thousands of people can die instantly." The room was completely silent now. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the terrible image floating above Derek's head. A Centauri student's voice cracked when he spoke. "Madness. Complete madness. You could destroy your whole planet with such weapons." "We nearly did," Derek admitted. "Humans created thousands of these weapons. We built them while still confined to one planet before we ever reached space. At one point in our history, Earth had enough atomic weapons to destroy human civilization multiple times over." He brought up a map of Earth. Red dots covered the planet, showing where weapons were stored. There were so many dots they almost covered the continents completely. Multiple nations possessed these weapons, Derek continued. All pointed at each other. Each nation had enough to destroy their enemies completely. And their enemies had the same capability. "How?" Professor Velnara asked. She sounded genuinely confused. "How did you survive? One accident, one mistake, and everything would end. Why did no one launch them?" Derek met her eyes. "Fear. We called it mutually assured destruction. Every nation knew that if they launched their weapons, their enemies would launch theirs. Everyone would die. No winners. No survivors. Just extinction." A military observer stood up in the back. She was a Trillian strategist, older and more experienced than the students. She had been taking notes constantly. "You trusted fear to save your species? That is not strategy. That is gambling with existence itself." "You are right," Derek agreed. "It was not a good strategy. But we did not have better options at the time. We either trusted that fear would prevent war, or we accepted that humanity might destroy itself. Those were our only choices." The strategist sat down slowly, shaking her head in disbelief. Derek changed the display again. This time it showed different types of warfare. Soldiers fighting in jungles where they could not see their enemies. Cyber attacks shutting down entire city power grids. Chemical weapons causing horrible suffering. Biological weapons spreading disease deliberately. Humans developed many forms of warfare that Federation species never encountered, Derek said. "We learned to fight in every environment. We created weapons to attack bodies, minds, computers, and infrastructure. We studied how to cause maximum damage with minimum resources." With each new type of warfare Derek described, the alien students looked more disturbed. Their fear was visible in their body language, their changing colors, their nervous movements. A young Vaxian female raised her hand. It was shaking. "Student Walsh, I must ask you directly. Are humans dangerous? Should we fear you?" The entire room waited for his answer. Even Professor Velnara leaned forward to hear his response. Derek was quiet for a long moment. He looked at all the frightened faces watching him. Then he spoke carefully. "That depends on what you mean by dangerous," he said. "Are humans capable of great violence? Yes. Our history proves that beyond any doubt. We know how to fight. We know how to destroy. We understand warfare better than most species in the Federation. Several students shifted nervously in their seats. But, Derek continued, humans are also capable of great kindness, of cooperation and sacrifice. Even in our darkest wars, we tried to limit suffering. He showed a new image. Human medics treating wounded soldiers on a battlefield. But these medics were treating both their own soldiers and enemy soldiers. They gave medical care to anyone who needed it, regardless of which side they fought for. We created rules even for warfare, Derek explained. The Geneva Conventions protected prisoners and civilians. We had codes of honor. We tried to fight humanely even when fighting brutally. We did not always succeed, but we tried. Professor Velnara checked the time display. We are almost out of time for today. Student Walsh, will you continue tomorrow? Derek nodded. Tomorrow I will explain what changed. How humans went from dozens of warring nations to one unified species. How we joined the Federation as a peaceful civilization. The students filed out slowly. Derek could hear their whispered conversations as they left. 70 million in one war. Weapons that destroy cities. Are we safe with them here? My government needs to know about this. Derek stood alone at the front of the room. The holographic display still showed Earth floating peacefully in space. It looked so calm and beautiful. No one watching it would guess the violent history that planet held. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow he would have to convince them that humans had truly changed. On the third day, Derek arrived with something different. He stood at the front of the lecture hall and activated 3 holographic projectors. 3 shimmering figures appeared beside him, life-sized and detailed. They were all human, but dressed in different styles of clothing from different time periods. Today I have brought guests, Derek announced. This is Dr. Lisa Chin, an expert in ancient warfare. This is Dr. Samuel Wright, who studies the world wars. And this is Colonel Richard Hayes, retired from Earth's military. He is a philosopher who studies why humans fight. The alien students stared at the holograms with wide eyes. Some looked frightened. Others seemed fascinated. The room was even more crowded than yesterday. Students packed every corner. Faculty members stood along the walls. Even the academy dean sat in the back row watching carefully. Professor Velnara spoke first. Her voice was troubled. Dr. Chin, I have a question that many of us cannot understand. Why did humans continue fighting after you developed weapons that could destroy your entire civilization? Most species stop warfare long before reaching that point. Dr. Chen's hologram smiled, but it was a sad smile. Because for most of our history, humans did not see ourselves as one species. We divided ourselves into groups based on nations, religions, ideologies, and resources. We saw other groups as enemies, not as fellow humans who shared our planet. A Centauri student raised his hand urgently. But the cost. Surely after the first atomic weapon was used, you understood the danger to everyone? Dr. Wright took this question. We did understand. And it terrified us. But fear was not enough to stop conflicts. Nations still believed their causes were worth the risk. They thought they could control the destruction. They thought they could win without triggering total annihilation. That is foolish, Avaxian muttered loudly. Completely illogical. Yes, it was, Colonel Hayes agreed calmly. But humans are not purely logical beings, especially during conflict. We are driven by emotions as much as reason. Sometimes more. The Tyrillian strategist from the previous days was present again. She had moved to the front row. I have studied your military history extensively over the past 2 nights, she said. Human tactics are more aggressive than anything in current Federation warfare. You do not retreat easily. You do not surrender when logically defeated. You fight to the last soldier if necessary. Why this stubbornness? Colonel Hayes straightened his posture. Even though he was just a hologram, his military bearing was clear. Because in human history, surrender often meant death. Or slavery. Or the complete destruction of our way of life. When the stakes are that high, humans fight with everything they have. We fight not just with weapons but with will. But those tactics lead to massive casualties, the strategist protested. Any logical species would negotiate before reaching such terrible losses. Surely preserving life is more important than victory? To you, yes, Hayes replied. Your species learned that lesson early. But humans fought for thousands of years before we understood it. We were willing to die for causes we believed in. A young Quillan student spoke up, her fur shifting nervously between colors. What causes? What could be worth so many deaths? Dr. Wright leaned forward. Many things. Freedom from oppression. Protection of our families. Religious beliefs. National pride. Resources our people needed to survive. Even revenge for past wrongs. He paused. Humans fight for abstract ideas as fiercely as we fight for physical survival. The alien students looked confused. Several whispered to each other, trying to understand this concept. A Vaxian raised his hand. But ideas are not real. You cannot touch them. How do you fight for something that does not physically exist? Derek stepped forward. Because to humans, ideas are real. Freedom feels as necessary as breathing. Honor matters as much as food. We are willing to suffer and die to protect what we believe in, even if others cannot see or measure it. The room went silent. This was clearly a difficult concept for many species to grasp. Professor Velnara spoke thoughtfully. Dr. Wright, you mentioned earlier that humans eventually learned important lessons. What lessons did you finally learn? Dr. Wright's expression grew more hopeful. That enemies today can become allies tomorrow. After World War II, nations that had fought brutally against each other became close partners. Germany and France, who had fought 3 major wars, became peaceful neighbors and friends. Japan and America, who had used atomic weapons against each other, became strong allies. We learned that peace was more valuable than victory. Then why maintain military forces? Professor Velnara asked. If you learned that peace is more valuable, why not abandon warfare completely like most Federation species did? Derek stepped forward again. Because humans learned another lesson at the same time. Peace must be defended. We have a human saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. The alien students looked even more confused now. Their expressions showed they could not reconcile these two ideas. Derek continued patiently. Humans discovered that those who are willing and able to fight for peace can often prevent war from happening. Strength deters aggression. Weakness invites it. This is what our history taught us. A Quillan student stood up suddenly. Her fur had turned bright red with distress. Are you saying that humans would fight again? That you keep the capacity for violence ready to use? Yes, Derek said simply. There was no hesitation in his voice. We maintain that capacity. But we hope with everything we are that we never need to use it. The room erupted. Students started arguing with each other. Some defended the human position. Others expressed fear and anger. Voices rose in a dozen different languages. Professor Velnara called for order, but it took several minutes for the room to quiet down. The Trillian strategist stood up. Her voice cut through the remaining noise. I have another question. Everyone fell silent. What finally ended human conflicts? What made your nations unite after 10,000 years of warfare? Derek smiled slightly. That is an excellent question. And it is exactly what I will explain tomorrow. Dr. Chen's hologram spoke gently. For now, please try to understand this. Humans did not change overnight. We did not suddenly become peaceful. It was a long process. Very painful. Very costly. But ultimately successful. Dr. Wright added, and it started when we realized we were not alone in the universe. When we discovered that other intelligent species existed. The alien students went completely still. This was information they had not expected. Colonel Hayes looked around the room at all the worried faces. I know our history disturbs you. I know you find it violent and hard to understand. But we do not hide what we were. We remember it. We study it. We use it to remind ourselves what we must never become again. The 3 holograms faded out slowly. Derek stood alone at the front of the room once more. A brave Vaxian student raised her hand. Her voice shook when she spoke. Student Walsh, I must ask you something directly. If Earth were threatened today, if your families were in danger, would humans fight like you did in your old wars? Derek met her eyes steadily. He did not look away. If our families were in danger? If our world faced destruction? Yes. Humans would fight with everything we have. We would use every capability we possess. We would not surrender. We would not retreat. We would defend what we love until our last breath. The student sat down slowly. Her face had gone pale. But, Derek added more softly, we would also try every other option first. We would negotiate. We would compromise. We would seek peaceful solutions. That is what we have learned. War is the last option now, not the first choice. Professor Velnara dismissed the class. As students gathered their belongings, Derek heard their quiet conversations. They are still dangerous. But they admit it honestly. I do not know if that makes things better or worse. At least they are not hiding their nature. Derek collected his materials slowly. Tomorrow he would tell them about first contact. About how meeting the ZH Theron probe changed everything for humanity. about how realizing other species existed gave humans a new perspective on themselves. He hoped they would understand. He hoped they would see that humans had truly changed even while keeping the capacity for what they once were. Derek stood before the packed lecture hall for the fourth day. Every seat was occupied. Students sat on the floor. They lined the walls 3 deep. News of the human presentations had spread beyond the academy. Derek noticed several government observers in the back, wearing official Federation credentials. They were recording everything. Today I will tell you about the day that changed everything for humanity, Derek began. He activated the holographic display. An image of space appeared, filled with distant stars. A small metallic object drifted slowly through the darkness. This is the ZH probe, Derek said. It entered our solar system 73 years ago. It was the first proof that humans were not alone in the universe. The alien students leaned forward. Every species remembered their first contact. It was always the most important moment in any civilization's history. The probe was automated, Derek continued. No crew. No living beings inside. It simply broadcast a message in mathematics and basic physics. An invitation to join the galactic community. He changed the image. Earth appeared, rotating slowly. But this Earth looked different than the peaceful unified world he had shown before. The night side blazed with lights from thousands of cities. Different colors marked different territories. At this time, Earth was divided into 196 separate nations, Derek explained. Each had its own government, its own military, its own interests and goals. A Centauri student interrupted immediately. 196 governments on a single planet? How did anything function? How did you communicate? How did you make decisions? Poorly, Derek admitted. Very poorly. We competed for resources. We argued over territory and trade. We maintained armies primarily to defend against each other, not against outside threats. He brought up footage of human leaders meeting in a large assembly hall. They were shouting at each other in different languages. Translators rushed between groups. Some delegates walked out angrily while others argued loudly. When the probe arrived, we faced a crisis, Derek said. Every nation wanted to be the first to respond. The first to make contact. The first to potentially gain new technology or allies from the stars. Dr. Wright's hologram appeared beside Derek. May I explain this part? Derek nodded and stepped aside. World leaders panicked, Wright said. Not because they feared alien invasion, but because they feared each other. Each nation worried that another nation would make contact first and gain advantages. For 3 months, Earth argued while the probe waited patiently in orbit. He showed more footage. Emergency meetings at the United Nations. Military forces going on alert. Scientists being restricted from responding to the probe. Protests in the streets of major cities. It was chaos, Wright continued. Some nations wanted to destroy the probe. Others wanted to claim it as their property. A few wanted to ignore it completely and pretend it did not exist. What ended the debate? Professor Velnara asked. She was taking detailed notes. Wright smiled. One person. A radio astronomer from India named Dr. Neena Patel. She was not a politician. Not a military leader. Not famous or powerful. Just a scientist who believed we were handling first contact badly. The alien students sat up straighter, interested. Dr. Patel sent a response to the probe without asking anyone's permission, Wright explained. She used the facility where she worked to broadcast a message. It said, "We are humanity. We are divided, but we are learning. Please be patient with us." Several alien students gasped. Aquilin's fur turned bright yellow with shock. The probe responded immediately, Wright said. It began teaching Dr. Patel the Federation's standard language. Basic words. Simple concepts. And it waited for humanity to organize itself properly. Derek stepped forward again. Dr. Patel's message did something unexpected. It embarrassed every nation on Earth. Here was one scientist admitting our flaws to the entire galaxy while our leaders argued about who had the right to speak for humanity. He showed news footage from that time period. Millions of humans marching in streets across the planet. They carried signs demanding unity. They chanted for their leaders to cooperate. Protests filled every major city. The people of Earth demanded better, Derek said. They forced their governments to work together. Citizens refused to accept that humanity would miss this opportunity because of old rivalries and pride. A Vaxian student raised his hand. So embarrassment united you? Not logic or strategy but shame. Partly, Derek agreed. But also hope. The probe's message promised knowledge. Technology. A place in a galactic community. Humans realized that if we wanted to join the Federation, we had to prove we could function as one species, not as hundreds of competing groups. Colonel Hayes's hologram appeared on Derek's other side. The formation of the Unified Earth Council was not smooth or easy. Many nations resisted. Some tried to maintain separate military forces. Others demanded special privileges and treatment. What forced them to cooperate? The Trillian strategist asked. She was taking notes faster than anyone else in the room. The probe delivered an ultimatum, Hayes explained. The Federation would only accept unified species. Earth could join as one voice or not at all. Individual nations could not join separately. That forced the final holdouts to compromise. Derek brought up images of long negotiation sessions. Human leaders from every continent working together. Arguments and debates that lasted months. Slowly, gradually, agreements being reached. It took 20 years, Derek said. 20 years of difficult negotiations. 20 years of compromises and occasional setbacks. Nations had to give up some independence. They had to trust old enemies. They had to put humanity's future above their own national interests. He showed the final signing ceremony. Representatives from every nation on Earth putting their marks on a single document. Celebrations erupting across the planet. Eventually, Earth learned to speak with one voice, Derek continued. We joined the Federation as a unified species. The Unified Earth Council represents all humans now. A Quillen student looked troubled. But you still have military forces. We have seen your ships. Earth's defense fleet is the largest in all of Federation space. Why maintain such forces if you are unified and at peace? Derek had been waiting for this question. He brought up images of Earth's current military. Massive warships bristling with weapons. Smaller fast attack craft. Support vessels. Carriers. Destroyers. The fleet was enormous. Earth's defense force is large because humans remember our history, Derek explained. We know what happens when peaceful people have no way to defend themselves. We learned that cooperation makes us stronger, but we also learned that peace requires vigilance. The Trillian strategist stood up. I have analyzed your fleet compositions over the past 3 days. Your tactics. Your training programs. Your response doctrines. She paused. Your military is built for overwhelming offensive capability despite claiming defensive purposes. Why? Derek looked at her directly. Because humans learned that half measures fail. If we must defend ourselves or our allies, we do it decisively. Quick victories save lives on both sides. Long wars cause more suffering. He changed the display to show Earth Defense Force ships responding to emergencies across Federation space. Delivering supplies to disaster zones. Protecting trade routes from pirates. Rescuing stranded vessels. We are also the first to offer help when Federation worlds need it, Derek added. Our ships carry humanitarian supplies. Our medical teams respond to disasters. Our engineering corps helps rebuild damaged infrastructure. We use our capabilities to protect and assist, not to threaten. Professor Velnara studied the images carefully. Your doctrine is unusual. You position forces defensively but maintain overwhelming response capability. This is different from most Federation militaries. Because humans believe in deterrence, Derek said. If potential enemies know we can respond with decisive force, they are less likely to attack in the first place. Strength prevents conflict. The Trillian strategist had one more question. Everyone in the room sensed it was important. Student Walsh, I must ask directly. If another species threatened the Federation, how would humans respond? The room went completely silent. Every eye focused on Derek. We would defend our allies with the same intensity we would defend Earth itself, Derek said firmly. The Federation accepted us when we were young and still learning. We owe the galaxy our protection now. We would stand with any Federation world facing aggression. Even if it meant war, the strategist pressed. Even if it meant returning to your old ways? Derek's voice was quiet but steady. We hope that day never comes. We work every day to make sure it does not come. But if our allies are threatened, if Federation worlds face destruction, then yes, humans would fight. A young student in the front row spoke up nervously. And you would win? Derek paused before answering. Humans do not fight to lose. We fight to protect what we love. History taught us how. We hope we never need those lessons again, but we remember them. The class sat in heavy silence. Tomorrow would be the final presentation. Derek would have to show them what human military capability actually meant in practice. On the fifth and final day, Derek entered the lecture hall to find it transformed. The Academy had moved the class to the main tactical simulation chamber. The room was enormous, with holographic projectors covering every surface. Tiered seating rose in a circle around the central display area. Every seat was filled. More people stood in the back. Derek recognized military officials from multiple Federation worlds. This was no longer just a student presentation. Professor Velnara stood at the center podium. Today is Student Walsh's final presentation. The Academy administration has approved use of our tactical simulator for this lesson. She looked at Derek. The floor is yours. Derek walked to the control panel. Thank you, Professor. Today I am not going to lecture. Instead, I am going to show you something practical. He activated the simulator. The entire room filled with holographic projections. Stars surrounded them. A planet appeared below. Space stations orbited peacefully. This is a simulation, Derek explained. A test scenario. I want volunteers from the class to defend this system against a hostile force. Hands went up immediately. Derek selected 6 students. 2 Centauri, 2 Vaxians, 1 Quillen and 1 Taurillian. They came down to the central control stations. You have a standard Federation defense fleet, Derek said. Holographic ships appeared around the planet. 12 patrol craft. 4 cruisers. 2 defensive platforms. Your mission is to protect the planet and space stations from attack. The students took their positions at the control stations. They looked confident. All of them had studied tactical defense in their classes. Derek activated the simulation. Red ships appeared at the edge of the system. Lots of them. They moved in fast, showing aggressive intent. Hostile force detected, the computer announced. 47 ships. Classification, raiders. Intent, attack. The alien students began giving commands. They positioned their ships in defensive formations around the planet. They opened communication channels to the raiders, attempting negotiation. They called for reinforcements from nearby systems. Everything by the book. Everything according to Federation defensive doctrine. The raiders did not respond to hails. They kept coming. The alien students ordered their ships to fire warning shots. They established defensive perimeters. They evacuated the space stations. Their tactics were textbook perfect. The raiders attacked anyway. They focused fire on individual Federation ships, overwhelming them one at a time. They ignored the defensive platforms. They moved fast, constantly shifting position. Within 8 minutes of simulation time, the alien students had lost half their fleet. The raiders were landing troops on the planet. The space stations were destroyed. Simulation ended, the computer announced. Defender defeat. Civilian casualties, estimated 73,000. Military casualties, estimated 2,000. The 6 students stepped away from the controls looking shocked. The Quillen's fur had turned dark gray with shame. One of the Vaxians was breathing hard, clearly upset. You followed proper Federation defensive doctrine, Derek said gently. You did everything correctly according to your training. But you lost. Professor Velnara frowned. The raiders were too aggressive. Too willing to accept casualties. No Real Federation species fights that way anymore. Exactly, Derek said. But what if you face an enemy that does fight that way? An enemy that does not follow Federation rules? He reset the simulation. Now I will show you the human approach. He took position at the control station himself. Same scenario. Same forces. Same enemy. The simulation started again. The same 47 raider ships appeared at the edge of the system. Derek's response was immediate and completely different. He did not open communication channels. He did not fire warning shots. Instead, he sent all 12 patrol craft directly at the raiders at maximum speed. He moved the cruisers to intercept positions. He armed the defensive platforms with full weapons. No attempt at negotiation? A student called out. They did not negotiate with you, Derek replied, his eyes fixed on the display. Why waste time? His patrol craft hit the raider formation like a hammer. They did not try to disable ships. They did not aim for engines or weapons. They targeted central masses, trying to destroy completely. 3 raider ships exploded in the first 30 seconds. The raiders focused fire on Derek's patrol craft. 2 were destroyed immediately. Derek did not pull the others back. Instead, he ordered them to ram damaged raider ships if their weapons failed. The watching students gasped. He is sacrificing his own people, someone whispered. Derek's cruisers arrived and opened fire with everything they had. The defensive platforms launched their full payload of missiles. Derek was not trying to defend anymore. He was trying to destroy the enemy fleet completely. The battle was vicious. Derek lost 6 patrol craft. 1 cruiser was badly damaged. But the raider fleet was being torn apart. Ships exploded constantly. The few raiders that tried to retreat were chased down and destroyed. After 7 minutes it was over. 15 raider ships were destroyed. The remaining 32 were fleeing the system, many of them damaged. Simulation ended, the computer announced. Defender victory. Civilian casualties, estimated 800. Military casualties, estimated 600. The room was completely silent. Derek stepped away from the controls. His hands were shaking slightly. That is how humans fight. We do not retreat. We do not defend passively. We attack with overwhelming force. We accept casualties to achieve victory. The Tyrillian strategist stood up slowly. You saved more civilians. Your military losses were lower than ours despite fighting more aggressively. But your approach requires a willingness to sacrifice that most Federation species do not have. Yes, Derek agreed. And that is exactly the point. Humans are willing to make those terrible choices. We have made them for thousands of years. Professor Velnara looked disturbed. Show us the cost. Run the simulation again but display casualty numbers for both sides throughout. Derek nodded and ran it again. This time numbers appeared beside every ship. Every explosion showed how many beings died. Every tactical decision displayed its cost in lives. The students watched in horror as the numbers climbed. Hundreds dead on both sides. Then thousands. The patrol craft Derek ordered to ram enemy ships. Each one had a crew of 15. All died in the impacts. When the simulation ended, the total death count floated in the center of the room. 2,000 beings dead. Most of them were raiders, but 600 were the defenders Derek commanded. A young Quillan student was crying. How can you accept such losses? Those were people. Lives with families and dreams. Derek's voice was heavy. Because if I had not accepted those losses, 73,000 civilians would have died instead. War forces terrible choices. Humans learn to make them. He deactivated the combat display. The room returned to normal. Everyone looked shaken. I want you all to understand something, Derek said. He spoke slowly, making sure everyone heard clearly. Humans do not want war. We have seen enough of it. We know the cost. We know the pain and suffering it causes. He looked around at all the frightened faces. But our history taught us hard lessons. We learned that evil exists, that some will use violence to take what they want, that peaceful people need the capacity to defend themselves. Colonel Hayes's hologram appeared beside Derek. There is a human saying that summarizes what we learned, Hayes said. Peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence. Peace is having that capacity and choosing not to use it. Derek nodded. Every single day humanity makes that choice. We have weapons. We have knowledge. We have the ability to wage war as intensely as we did in our history. But we choose peace instead. We choose cooperation. We choose to protect rather than conquer. He brought up one final image. It showed Earth as it appeared now. Peaceful. Unified. Beautiful. Cities glowing gently at night. Orbital stations conducting research. Ships leaving for peaceful exploration. This is what humans chose, Derek said softly. After 10,000 years of warfare, after millions of deaths, after almost destroying ourselves, we finally chose peace. Not because we cannot fight, but because we learned that peace is better. Professor Velnara stood. Student Walsh, you have shown us things that disturb us greatly. You have revealed capabilities that frighten many species in this room. But you have also shown us honesty. Humans do not hide what they are. Derek met her eyes. We cannot change our history. We can only learn from it and choose to be better. The Tyrillian strategist spoke up. I have one final question. If that simulation was real, if those raiders were actually attacking a Federation world, would Earth respond? Yes, Derek answered immediately. Earth Defense Force ships would respond with everything we have. We would defend any Federation world as fiercely as we would defend Earth itself. Even knowing the cost, she pressed. Especially knowing the cost, Derek replied. Because humans learned that the cost of doing nothing is always higher. Evil succeeds when good people refuse to act. The room sat in long silence. Finally, a Vaxian student stood up and began clapping slowly. Others joined. Soon the entire room was applauding. Not because they celebrated violence, but because they understood that humanity had truly changed while remembering what it once was. Derek felt tears in his eyes. After 5 days of showing the worst of human history, They finally understood the most important part. Humans had learned. Humans had grown. Humans had chosen to be better. Professor Velnara approached Derek as students filed out. "That was the most difficult and important lesson I have ever witnessed," she said quietly. "The Federation needs to understand humanity. Both the danger and the hope you represent." Derek nodded. "We are what we are. Peaceful by choice. Dangerous by capability. And committed to protecting those who gave us a chance to be part of something greater than ourselves." He gathered his materials and left the simulation chamber. Behind him, he heard students still talking, still processing what they had learned. The conversation about humanity was just beginning. But at least now, the galaxy understood what humans truly were. And maybe, Derek hoped, they also understood why the Federation was safer with humanity in it rather than outside it.